A very warm welcome to all of you, and thank you for tuning in this episode of UK-ASEAN Business Council Digital Export Series on the future of the food and drink sector in ASEAN. I'm Veronica Lake with the UK-ASEAN Business Council based in London. Today we are delighted to have DIT and Insight experts joining this discussion, led by UK-ASEAN Business Council Executive Director Ross Hunter. Before we begin, I have a couple of housekeeping points to highlight. Firstly, as you can see, you are all on mute, but this does not stop you engaging with our speakers. To ask a question or to make a statement, open the question box on your control panel. We will then direct your questions to the speakers during the Q&A session. Secondly, please note that the slides used today, the recording of this webinar, and all speakers' contact details will be shared after the event. And lastly, please remember to reserve your virtual seat for the upcoming UK-ABC Digital Conversation Series on Indonesia's digital economy on the 29th of July at 8:45 UK time, where we will be joined by a stellar panel. To register, visit our website www.ukabc.org.uk. And now, to guide you through a discussion on the latest insight on the food and drink sector in ASEAN, I'll hand over to our Executive Director, chairing today's discussion. Ross, the floor is all yours.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that energetic introduction, Veronica. As Veronica said, I'm Ross Hunter. I head up the UK-ASEAN Business Council. And this event today is something that we strive to do. It's bring the experts to you, bring ASEAN to you so you can understand a bit more about the opportunities in the market to help you with your exporting decisions. As Veronica said, we've got two sets of experts today. We've got the fantastic DIT who are there to support you through your exporting needs. But also we have a food and drink export development agency specialising in high growth, specialising in the high growth markets of Asia, Insight. So the order of play, I'm going to speak for a couple of minutes just on UKBC and then briefly on ASEAN. It won't be a deep dive, political, cultural tour de force of ASEAN because that would take far too long. So just a quick couple of points on ASEAN. We're then going to hear from Andy Smith about the support DIT can provide in the UK, but also in ASEAN. And then we're going to have an insightful presentation from Emma and Cameron on the food and drink market, who are the food and drink market entry specialists in this region. But then after that is the key thing is a conversation. As Veronica said, we want this to be interactive, so do fire in your questions to us as well that I can put to our panel of experts. We even have a digital goodie bag for you later on as well, which we'll send out after this. So next slide, please, Veronica. So at UK-ABC, we were set up to increase trade and investment with Southeast Asia. The reason for that is that it will be the fourth largest economy in the world in less than a decade. So it really is too big to ignore. But it is a grouping of 10 very dynamic yet very different markets, and this will come out hopefully later with during Insight's presentation as well. That navigating these markets takes a bit of time as well, but because they are so very, very different, the 10 markets of ASEAN. We do have an active outreach program, and it was and it will be a physical program as well. That was obviously pre-COVID. So the physical program went across the UK, bringing ASEAN to a town near you. But we also have a digital program, such as today. We have a webinar series, a digital conversation series, and this will continue. Even when we can get back to those nondescript hotel rooms that we journey around the UK and bring ASEAN to you, where we get to sit around those tables and eat those horrible mints. I miss those days, but we will get back to those, but we will still have a digital program to sit alongside it as well. The other key plank of our work is our UK-ASEAN business network. So this is a tremendous network that we have established over the years, and we want you to use and abuse it as well. So in the UK, we have connections with DIT across the regions and in HQ, and other government departments as well. Intellectual Property Office, for example, as well, which are a key partner of ours. British Chambers of Commerce across the UK, trade associations, embassies and high commissions, ASEAN embassies, high commissions and embassies, based in London. They're a great resource, but a very underutilized resource as well. They're great specialists, as you'd expect, on their country, and often we bounce ideas off them. So again, please do feel free to use them. And also, we have a great network of real-life exporting companies. People that have done that are exporting, that have exported, and have got that T-shirt as well. So we're very happy to connect you with them, to learn from them. They're very happy to help us and help you as well. And I hear you say, where are they today? Where's our case study today? Unfortunately, we did have a case study lined up today as well, but due to these testing times, they had to pull out a couple of days ago as well. So as you can see from the picture there as well, some of the events that we've done. We've had the Prime Minister of Thailand in the UK talking about the opportunities there. We've had our chair talking about events, Baroness Neville Rolfe. And then in the bottom left-hand side, there's one of those real-life exporters I spoke about, Chris Bishop, who's done a fantastic job exporting to predominantly Indonesia, but now based in Singapore as well. So these are the kind of people we can connect you to. Also in ASEAN as well, great network there from DIT, the fantastic British Chambers of Commerce in the region that Andy will mention later, but also specialist companies who are experts in their field like Insight, and we have a number of those for each of the sectors as well. Next slide, please. So very, very briefly on ASEAN, because we said it's not going to be a deep dive. So the size of the prize is there. It's 10 dynamic countries, 650 million population thereabouts, half of which are under the age of 30. And when I do travel out to the region, I feel old going there. Well, some might say, well, my son certainly says I am old. But you know, this is a very young and dynamic population as well. It currently is the 6th largest economy in the world if it was one economy. But again, as I said earlier, this will grow to be the 4th largest behind the US, China, and EU in just under 10 years. It is it's moving towards a single trading market as well. Interesting to hear about this from Insight later as well in terms of market entry strategy. But they are coming together to be a trading union, but it won't be like the EU though. There will be no political union or common currency as well. So it's really a one, like the EU one trading platform. So that was a very brief rundown of ASEAN. There's lots and lots of information on ASEAN on our website at the highest level, right down to sector information as well. So please do look at that. So as the next slide says, and as if by magic, young Andy has appeared on the screen. So like that well-known credit card that you shouldn't leave home without, I'd suggest that you shouldn't even consider exporting, or at least chatting to the wonderful folk at DIT first. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Andy, who is the International Relations Manager at DIT West Midlands. Andy, over to you.
Thanks very much indeed, Ross. That's great launch. Thank you. We'd like to move on to the next slide, please, Veronica. Thank you. And the next one again. Yeah, so as Ross says, I work for DIT in the West Midlands region of England. I'm not one of the food and drink sector team. My colleague there unfortunately wasn't available today, but I'm going to cover what she would have said. So a little bit of an intro to us and then the support we can provide in UK and overseas through both our teams and embassies there, but also our delivery partners from the Chamber network. So DIT, we were created in 2016 after the Brexit referendum. It united a number of previously separate government agencies under one umbrella, and I work in the export support element, which is the top left box there. We also have a team that look after inward investment into the UK, and then there's a group looking after trade policy who are clearly extraordinarily busy at the moment, trying to negotiate free trade agreements with the US, Japan, and various other countries and markets. And then the final plank is promotion of the UK through the GREAT campaign, promoting global Britain. Next slide, please, Veronica. So how can we help you in English regions or devolved countries in the UK? The column on the left gives you some ideas of the sorts of support that are available. And these, in England, they're all accessed through what we call international trade advisors, who are usually formerly export directors, commercial people with long experience in sales and knowledge of different parts of the world or different sectors. You can, if you're not already working with an international trade advisor, you can find one through the link at the bottom of the page there. That takes you to gov.uk and a link to English regions delivery partners for export support. If you're listening in Scotland, Wales or Northern Ireland, in Northern Ireland, the Invest Northern Ireland in Belfast would be the source of advice there. In Scotland, it's Scottish Development International. If you Google that, you'll be able to find a link. And in Wales, the Welsh Assembly will provide support, but your local chamber or economic development department of your local authority would also be able to point you to the right people. We have specialist advisors covering things like IP protection, business culture in particular markets, e-commerce and website internationalization and that kind of thing. And we run lots of events and webinars, and I'm very pleased to be partnering UK-ABC on this food and drink webinar. We have a couple of others coming up, one on South Korea on the 21st, one on the UAE on the 28th of July, and there are a whole series of agri-tech webinars as well, which I'll mention on the next slide. The column on the right you can look at your leisure. Those are links to different government sources of either grant support or advice helping you access trade shows overseas to exhibit on a subsidized basis, finding export opportunities by market or sector, putting your own company profile on effectively a digital shop window to find potential buyers, or accessing e-commerce platforms with slight discounts negotiated by DIT. Next slide, please, Veronica. So in terms of support for the sector, the government launched a bounce back plan 3 weeks ago now for the food and drink sector. The webinars I mentioned are part of a whole suite which you can access through that link. As I say, there are, as well as food and drink webinars such as this one, there are ones for the agri-tech sector coming up. So I think there's one immediately after this one for Central Asia and Eastern Europe. They've got ones with Latin America and Africa as well in the next week, I think. So plenty going on there. We have e-commerce advisors, as I mentioned, around the country, and we're trying to turbocharge the support that they're providing at the moment, particularly given the importance of e-commerce during the lockdown. There's a new agri-food council going to be based in Dubai to support companies exporting to that part of the world. We're all part of something called the Great British Food Programme, which is supported by DIT and DEFRA and led by our delivery partner colleagues in the Southwest, Business West. And they're really innovative and have come up with some great schemes, such as the Great British Food Box you can see on the right. So hampers of selected products get sent to buyers overseas who can then taste, touch, feel the product, and then have a video conference with the supplier and advise on, likelihood of success in their market. There's a sister product, which is a spirit box, does what it says on the label. We in the Midlands are running a food and drink campaign, a 4-stage campaign to support companies get into markets overseas. And we're also doing an in-depth program with the China-Britain Business Council for food and drink companies, amongst other sectors. So contact me if you're interested in any of those. Next slide, please, Veronica. Thanks. So complementing the work here, we've got a big team in London, including a food and drink specialist team. The lady who ordinarily covers Asia is called Kate Shannon there. And we've divided the world into 9 sort of super regions, each presided over by a senior commercial diplomat, ambassador rank, called Her Majesty's Trade Commissioner. And for Asia Pacific, which includes the ASEAN region, it's a lady called Natalie Black. Our teams in the embassies can provide help on a number of sectors, but to be honest, they don't focus on food and drink. If I can have the next slide, please, Veronica. They, thank you. They focus on other sectors where they perceive there to be sort of big ticket wins potentially for UK exporters. But don't despair, we have a very comprehensive and competent network of local delivery partners in the British Chambers of Commerce in 8 of the 10 ASEAN markets, and that's where they would help you. So if you're looking for support, your first point of call should be your ITA, and if you don't have one, follow the links I mentioned earlier, and they can put you in touch with either the chamber in the relevant market directly, or it's a British business group in the case of Vietnam and Laos, or you can obviously contact Ross and team at UK-ABC. Next slide, please, Veronica. And just to give you an idea of what the chambers overseas in ASEAN can do for you, as Ross said, they come over fairly regularly on these road shows, the rubber chicken circuit, and they enjoy hospitality of different regions and offer one-to-one meetings with businesses. It's a great way to get a quick feel for whether your product would fly in their market. And they run a number of other events, as you can see on the left-hand side there. Next slide, please, Veronica. I think actually that's pretty much me done, but that's just to show you the similar map to what the one Ross shows, but this shows you the names of the delivery partners in those markets. And I should maybe just do a final plug. UK Export Finance is the government's export credit guarantee department. Their strapline is that no viable export should fail for lack of finance, and they've made special provision during the COVID lockdown to be able to support companies into a number of markets where they previously couldn't, but they can also help, interestingly, tier 1 suppliers. So if you're not actually exporting yourself, but you supply a company who is, potentially you could get support through them, working capital or a guarantee if your commercial bank won't lend for whatever reason. You can talk to UKEF. And I think that concludes my slides. Just click one more, Veronica, but I think that's my last one.
You're chancing it, Andy, aren't you? Seeing if there's another slide hiding there. That's great. And again, I was going to ask about UK, but I guess companies wouldn't have to seek them out because the ITA would bring those in on board as and when as well.
Yeah, and they've got a network of export finance managers around the country who can be deployed. And some people think they have a sort of minimum price tag to get out of bed for, but it's not true. Actually, they will support companies of a number of, including fairly modest companies, as long as you've got a viable export prospect.
Yeah, I love the idea of those export boxes as well, and I'd be interested to hear from Insight to see if they think they're good ideas. But I particularly like the Spirit box. I think it's really important that UK-ABC staff really get to understand the products a bit more. So if we can get some of those sent to the office, that'd be fantastic.
Absolutely. We'll put you in touch with Paul Abley immediately. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Andy. And we'll come back to you in the Q&A later on as well. I'm sure there'll be some questions for you. But now, without further ado, we're going to hand over to the Insight team, who will be sharing some of their valuable insight gained over a decade of launching food and drink brands in the region as well. So we've got a double act. We've got Emma and Karen. We have had some technical problems with Emma's microphone, so we're going to see how this goes. So we might have to drop Emma's camera off, but we'll see how it goes. But guys, over to you for your presentation.
Thank you so much, Ross, and good evening in that part of the world. Good morning to you all in the UK. As Ross mentioned, I might get switched off at mid talking if I start to sound like a Dalek. So apologies if that happens. So I'm Emma. My colleague Cameron will be joining partway through the presentation to co-present with me. I'm the General Manager here at Insight. I've been in the Asia region for over 20 years. I'm going to present to you a piece today about Insight, a little bit about who we are, ASEAN, all the big key opportunities and considerations when launching a brand into our markets. Some results from a distributor survey that we ran in February. A little bit about COVID and how it's affected our market dynamics here, but not too much. And a couple of case studies that we felt relevant to share with you guys in a couple of categories. And then I think we've got some time at the end for a Q&A. If we don't get around to all of the questions or the answers even, we can always take that offline at another point or stay at the end if anyone wants to talk to us. Next slide, please. Next slide, please, Veronica. Oh, thank you. Okay, so who are we? Insight are a food and drink export development agency. We specialise in the high growth markets in Asia. The markets we cover: Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines, Thailand, Hong Kong, Taiwan, South Korea, and Australia. You can see on the right-hand side, or maybe on your left-hand side, a few of our clients that we've worked with and have worked with over the years. I think what's really interesting for people in the UK, or brands in the UK sat looking at our markets, is the diversity of the brands that we work with. You'll recognise some UK household names in there, with Ella's Kitchen and the Meatless Farm and Jude's. So we've got some experience in working with some very big, high sort of brands that everybody will know about, right through to brands that probably just launched or had some investment capital and looking to expand across our region. Next slide, please, Veronica. I won't go on too much about this piece. Ross shared some insights onto the economic region and how big it is. I think everybody's always asking us what the size of the prize is in the markets that we operate in, and it's quite difficult to give a precise answer when looking at a brand. But I think what we wanted to demonstrate here was, if you're looking at our region in terms of an economic bloc, we're kind of the GDP 2.95 trillion US dollars. And what's really unique is when you're looking at the F&B sector within our market, is unlike the US or Europe, where we've still got big GDPs, we've not been saturated with food and beverage brands, and certainly international brands. So there's a lot of opportunity, especially within the emerging markets within our region. Next slide, please, Veronica. Now, this slide here is actually a grocery superstore in Bangkok in Thailand. And what I wanted to share really with you here is, when you're sat sort of the other side of the world, it's quite difficult to understand sometimes, if you haven't been in store and seen some of these supermarkets, just how sort of international they are. You could be really in a supermarket anywhere in Europe here. This is just an example one in Bangkok in Thailand. And we are seeing an increase of world-class supermarkets in our region. Slide, please, Veronica. Slide, please, Veronica. Oh, sorry. Again, this is another great example. This could be an aisle in any grocery store in the UK, and it looks like a huge high demand from buyers for source brands inside the UK. Across here, we've got an example of a meat category. Next slide, please, Veronica. And we've also seen a large expanding explosion, if you like, of our premium segment here. This is a supermarket, cold storage flagship store in Great World City in Singapore. And you could be looking at any kind of Waitrose in the UK, or a Harrods food hall with the kind of level that they're at. So premium segment, we're seeing a big increase. Large expat community. English is the official language spoken in Hong Kong and Singapore, so relatively easy to conduct business in those countries. Next slide, please, Veronica. This is a great example here of the food and drink landscape in each market. We've got 120 major supermarket retailers across the markets we work in, with 7,993 supermarket outlets. So that's quite a vast amount. It's really important for each to understand each of the supermarkets, how they operate within each country. To give an example, if we take Singapore, there's a domestic and a regional landscape. With domestic, the supermarkets are Fair Price, are government owned. And on a regional basis, we have cold storage, which is owned by a dairy farm, and it operates out of Hong Kong. I'm just going to pass you over to my colleague Cameron, who's going to present the next part of our presentation.
Okay, Ross, Andy, Veronica, thanks for putting this together today. And we're really enjoying participating and working alongside you guys. So my name is Cameron Gordon. I've got 12 minutes, so I'll try and keep it short. I am the founding partner, and I'm head of client growth at Insight. Next slide, please, Veronica. Okay, so I'm going to cover some of the key considerations from a very pragmatic perspective for brands that are looking at entering ASEAN markets. I'm going to cover some of the access and barriers, some of the market entry models that are common for our region, channels and investment, the competitive landscape, and also the importance of a solid pricing strategy. Next slide, please, Veronica. Okay, so we talked a little bit before about how ASEAN is, I guess, formalizing a union. We have, well, I guess, you know, I would support that argument. We've been hearing a lot about that argument for the last 10 years, and our Insight's a sales company, so we're very much focused on getting to the sale. And what we've seen and what we've seen across, you know, across the region for the last 10 years is not a heck of a lot of progress, to be honest, in terms of making life easier for food and beverage exporters to the region. You have some countries such as Singapore that are very developed. You know, export documentation, export processes are very simple. And then you've got absolute nightmares like Indonesia, Thailand, and the Philippines, where there are some significant roadblocks and processes that need to be gone through prior to being able to legally export your goods to that country. Now, you can be positive and negative about that. Obviously, Singapore is one of the most open economies in the world. So everybody is there. Every brand from every part of the world is there, vying for a relatively small population. Whereas a market like Indonesia, 260 million people, very, very difficult to get that initial work done. Once you're in, you know, your competitive landscape is a lot more forgiving, I would say. So you've got to weigh up the pros and cons of some of those processes that need to be satisfied. Next slide, Veronica. Okay, market entry models. So there are really 4 market entry models as we see it in terms of being able to sell into a market. Obviously, aside from e-commerce, but if our business is mostly focused on more mainstream grocery channels, so you can go down the importer and distributor route. You can go down the agent or 3PL route. That's a common one as well. You can go down the consolidator route, which is where you sell to an onshore consolidator in the UK, and then they send your goods out internationally. And then you can also, in some cases, sell direct to retail. Now, we'll make this slide available. We don't really have the time to go into the depths of it, but in our view, after doing this for 10 years, the most successful route is by going through a deliberate process and a robust process to find the right importer and distributor in each market. I'll talk a bit about how we do that shortly. And to go through that process and appoint the right partner who can obviously help you access all the most relevant grocery channels for your products in the market, and also manage the merchandising, the marketing, the promotions and the like that are going to drive your products off the shelf. There are other arguments for using consolidators and you know, trying to sell direct to retail and the like, but I'll leave it to you to go through this slide in particular to get our views on what some of the advantages and disadvantages of each of those models are. Okay, this is a typical, I guess, time frame as we see it from woe to go in terms of, you know, setting out to launch, setting out with the intention of going into a market and launching. So from our perspective, getting that export strategy getting that export strategy right is very important. The major fundamentals for us there are pricing strategy, promotion strategy, distribution strategy, you know, really trying to understand where you are going to be priced on the shelf in the market, factoring in your export price and your supply chain margins. taking a deep dive into the competitiveness of the category and understanding what your positioning in that category will be, understanding what those target distribution channels are, what it's going to cost you to list into those channels with listing fees and advertising and promotional commitments and the like. That's very important. It's very important to understand those things before you're going out to pitch to distributors, because if you can show the market that you understand it as well as they do, and you understand your positioning and you understand the category, you're setting up a no-brainer situation for the distributor where it's hard for them to say no. If you're just going out and you're throwing out a price list and some samples, it's a much harder route to go down that than putting the time in at the beginning to understand it. Bringing in distribution proposals, of course, is very important for distributors, so that when you're appointing distributors, you're making those appointments based on solid, robust plans. Negotiating distributor agreements takes a bit of time. There's FDA registration in some countries, which is typically managed by the distributor. There's the retail listings, there's the first PO received, there's the shipment, etc. So typically in most of the markets, we tend to get through that process in 6 to 9 months on average. In some cases, we do it much faster. In some cases, it takes a little bit longer just because of the nature of business. Next slide, please, Veronica. Okay, channels and investment. Coming back to what I said earlier, it's really good to understand those target distribution channels in terms of grocery, if that's your game, prior to, let's say, going out and engaging distributors. It would be great if it was as simple as turning up to the retailer and the retailer saying, "I like your product, I'll put it on the shelves." But unfortunately, it's not that simple. All the major grocery channels around Southeast Asia will charge you listing fees for the pleasure of putting your products on their shelf. So it's really good to have a good understanding of what those listing fees are going to be, and to really understand also which channels are worth going into in the first place, because you can fork out a hell of a lot of money listing into channels that perhaps aren't appropriate for your products. So it is worth putting time into that. Knowing the channels that are relevant will obviously help you gauge scale and also the budget that's required to go into this market. Next slide, please. I've talked again a bit about channels and investment already. It's important to understand that a number of these markets are very much global marketplaces. I'm from New Zealand, and when we look at grocery in New Zealand, we have a very domestic grocery business, I think, here in New Zealand. So we've had clients in the dairy business, for example, in the cheese business, that always go out comparing themselves against their domestic competition when looking at export markets. But if you look at a market like Singapore, because of that very open economy, everybody is there. So you're not just up against the New Zealand cheeses, you're up against obviously the UK, you're up against the Europeans, you're up against everyone. So it's really important to understand that category prior to putting that cash on the table for listing fees. And the best way to do that obviously is to obviously go to market, to understand the category, or have someone with experience in launching brands in that category to really give you a good first-hand snapshot of what that category is doing. Next slide, please. Pricing, I cannot say how important pricing is in this part of the world. Nothing is going to save a poor pricing strategy. No amount of A&P or marketing spend will help if you are that far outside of the category. And what can happen, obviously, is, and a number of our UK brands have come to us whereby they've previously sold into some of these markets using that onshore consolidator from the UK. And when you sell, it's important to understand that when you sell to a consolidator in your market to take care of your international business, you're outsourcing that responsibility for getting that strategy right. And as the consolidator model is really a service business, it's not always geared towards looking out for the best interests of the brand itself. I'll come to a case study on that shortly, but it's really important to understand the category, the margins that need to be applied on your export pricing, to really understand plus or minus where you're going to land on the shelf. Because if you go into the market with the wrong pricing strategy and you hit the shelf at the wrong price, it's going to be very difficult to undo. So it's worth putting the time in to get that right prior to going out and trying to obviously sell to distributors and the like. Next slide, please. Okay, a little bit about COVID. We can't really avoid the subject. Many countries are obviously still in some form of lockdown. The grocery sector is seeing a surge, obviously, in sales, as it is in a lot of places throughout the world. Businesses increasingly are being conducted via virtual channels and the like, but you know, it's quite difficult if you're trying to launch a brand in a market for the first time, when you don't really know the distributors or the customers that you're going after, to try and do it virtually. We're fortunate that we've been doing this for 10 years and a lot of our relationships are already in place, and a lot of our clients are really leveraging off those relationships. But you know, it's a plus and a minus, I think, because it's a plus in that the option is there, but it's a minus because obviously virtual can in some cases be a very you know, cold format for doing business. Distributors are still looking for new opportunities for grocery, but food service is obviously a challenge. Next slide, please. Okay, I'll quickly race through that because my alarm's just gone off. Okay, this case study is one of our clients, #1 in the yogurt category in Australia, very dominant in Australia, but again, took that hands-off approach to exporting by using a consolidator. What happened in that scenario was that the consolidator took care of the business. There was no real oversight on the pricing, so their product was upwards of 70% too high price-wise on the shelf. So while they were #1 in Australia with a huge number of facings in the refrigerators, they had very limited facings, very limited distribution. They were always on fire sale because their price was too high. There was no merchandising, there was no marketing. So, you know, I would encourage you to have as much participation in your strategy as you can in really working with whatever partner you go with to really nut out the pricing strategy, the distribution strategy, the promotion strategy, all those things before you appoint your distributor and you go to market. Because once you appoint a distributor, the deal's kind of done. It's a bit like dating to some degree. I mean, you want to know everything prior to signing off on it, I guess. So, you know, it's really important to ask those hard questions. So in this case, this client was obviously unhappy with where they were, given that they were so strong in their domestic market. So we went through a process of, you know, really trying to improve the strategy around doing distribution audit, you know, where they were distributed versus where they should have been distributed, looking at their competitors and realigning where their price really should be, factoring in those relevant supply chain margins. We went through a process of engaging distributors. We appointed a distributor. We fine-tuned the plan. We went to do the retailer listings. But again, the challenge with this consolidator model is that in grocery in Asia, you've got two buyers within the grocery chain. You've got one that buys from the local importers and distributors, and you've got one that kind of looks after that consolidated business. And of course, they've got their own dynamics. So trying to wrestle the business from the distributor, from the consolidator away to that distributor model took a long time. So I guess what I'm saying here is, look, if you're in the fortunate position of having not found yourself in this situation, then you should pat yourself on the back, and you should really think carefully about what you're doing and what the end game is prior to jumping into bed with an easy sale. So I guess that would be my summary there. Choose your model right the first time, and then obviously go with it. So I'd like to hand back to Emma now. I've overdone it a little bit, so over to you, Emma.
Thank you, Cameron, for sharing all of those wonderful insights with us. I'm not going to be too long. I'm just going to present to you the feedback from our distributor survey that we did back in February, I believe. We asked our distributors a few questions in terms of how they see UK brands in the market and what their perception of them were. So I'm just going to present them as they come up. There's just 4 key questions we asked. So we asked what was the most sought after categories across the ASEAN region. We came back with the feedback was snacks, biscuits, beverages and protein were the top answers there. Moving across to what were the perceived strengths of the UK brands? Quality products with good design, innovation and packaging were number 1 and 2 there. Moving on to the next slide. The last 2 questions we asked, what were the perceived barriers for UK brands? High export pricing was seen as the biggest barrier for UK brands to succeed in Asia, followed by the lack of awareness. And the last piece, distributors associate the UK with, as you can see, biscuits, beverages, dairy and meat. So a lot of information there, but one of the biggest insights for us really was that the ASEAN region has a huge opportunity for British brands who are massively underrepresented in the markets we operate in. And that brings us to the end of our piece for this presentation. I'd like to say thank you for joining us today. I hope you've learned something new about exporting to our markets, and that you've got a better understanding of some of the challenges that we have to find and navigate our way through. Feel free to answer. We're having a Q&A now, I believe. There's our contact details if you would like to reach out to either Cameron or myself. But thank you for joining us, and yeah, we'll be on for the Q&A. I'm going to hand you back over to Ross.
Thanks, Emma. Thanks, Cameron. That was fantastic. Crikey, it's complicated, isn't it? Look, we've had lots of questions, so I'm going to fly through some of these just to get the juices flowing. Andy, a couple for you, sir, to start with about UK-EF. So Charlie's asked about contact details, so we'll connect you with Charlie to be able to connect them to UK-EF as well. And some questions about chilled export boxes for samples as well. So did you mention chilled dairy boxes? Or is this...
I didn't. I think at the moment they're only ambient products, but I think it's something that Business West were looking at for the future. But I believe at the moment it's just ambient products. Well,
I'll connect you with Jonathan afterwards as well, just to see where they're at. Maybe depending where Jonathan is. If he's in the southwest, even better. Insights. What's the process of listing with you, and what is the applicable cost? Well, I'm not sure you're talking about cost on here, but maybe this is a chance, guys, to bring in your 2-for-1 offer.
Emma, you want me to take that? Yeah, I'll take that. Okay, so yeah, let me just talk a little bit about the process first, and I think
very briefly, Cameron, because we've got quite a few questions.
Yeah, sure. Okay, let's keep it. Okay, so we do 3 things. The first thing that we do is that we help our clients understand the category, their price positioning, target distribution channels and costs of entry. That's the first bit. Second, the core business for us is sales. So we go out and engage distribution partners on our clients' behalf. We bring in distribution plans from them, and we appoint distributors, and then we roll out listings. And then the third bit that we do is that we key account manage. So we manage the distributors through regular meetings, regular reviews, and the like.
So we'll connect you afterwards, though, Cameron, so you can have a deeper dive on that one.
Sure.
Did you want to mention the 2-for-1 offer at this point?
Oh, sure, no problem at all. So I mentioned earlier around helping clients understand the markets. We're running a promotion, obviously, with our, as a result of our participation in this virtual conference. We're offering a 2-for-1 offer on those reports that we do for our clients. So typically, you pay for one market, but now you can do 2 markets and get 1 market free. So we can provide more information about that in the goodie bag, as I understand it.
Fantastic. Now we've got a very technical question for you as well. Can you develop labeling with various mandatories to minimize SKUs, which I googled and is stock keeping units, if you weren't familiar, Cameron and Emma? Does that make sense to you?
Can you just repeat that one more time, please?
Can you develop labeling with various mandatories to minimize SKUs and complexity?
Okay, so yeah, this is one thing that's often understood. You don't need to change your packaging at all. A lot of people think that they need to change their packaging and print new labeling for each market, but typically across all our markets, all that's required is a small sticker to be applied on the pack, which lists who your distributor is, and also any information which is required to meet the local regulations. So don't go out and develop a whole lot of new packaging. Keep it simple. And in a lot of cases, if the distributor wants your product that much, they'll put the label on when it arrives in the market, so you don't actually have to do anything.
We have an example of an exporter of a beverage who replaced all her labels on that basis. So had she spoken to you guys, could have saved a lot of time and effort.
One thing I would say as well is halal is obviously important in a number of our markets. One thing I'd say is don't print your halal logo on your packaging because halal's is quite a political world, and in some cases halal bodies come and go. So if you printed halal certification from one specific halal certification supplier on your packaging and they fall out of favor with the local, with the halal authorities in that specific market, you can run into problems if that logo is still printed on your packaging.
Taking that on then, Cameron, as well about halal, obviously there is there is halal markets within ASEAN as well. So what should companies in the UK consider when they are looking at ASEAN as well? Should everything be halal when they're looking to go out there?
In the grocery business, it's a bit different in food service because in places like Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia, a lot of the food service kitchens are halal only kitchens. So you have to have the halal certification. But you've really got to ask yourself, who is your consumer? And in a lot of cases for British and New Zealand and Australian products, which are relatively premium, your product is not always going to be relevant to a halal consumer. So in Singapore, for example, if you're selling into the upper echelon kind of tier 1, tier 2 stores, I would argue that halal is not necessarily that important. It depends on the category though, but in places like Indonesia, it's a bit more important. But yeah, I'd have a good think about it. Halal it's very important from the halal consumer, obviously, that you're looking after them and that you're meeting their needs. But from a supplier perspective, it can become a bit of an operational cost. So you've just got to look at the market and talk to your distributor and really understand who your consumer is and whether that halal certification is required for that market.
Yeah. Okay. And then going back to Emma's last words, really about how UK brands are underrepresented. The question from Robin Stevens. Hello, Robin. It's about do UK brands still have a cachet outside the expat market? Is there a sustainability model that relies on mainly the premium expat market in the separate countries? So basically, is there life outside the expat market, I guess, for the UK premium brands?
It's the same for New Zealand and the same for Australia, right? It's the same issue. It all comes down. It comes down to the category and your position within it. If you're priced that far outside the mainstream category, then of course you're only going to be relevant to expats that can traditionally afford the product. But if you can find the right position, look, that case study I gave before, we brought their export pricing back 70%. just through understanding the market and working with distributors who would work on reliable on relevant margins. Of course, if you're a brand that is going in fresh and you don't know these things, then you don't know what's normal or what's reasonable. So distributors will take advantage. But if you're going to have that sensible conversation with them and really map out what that supply chain looks like, and I don't want to sound like I'm all about discount pricing, but the better that you're positioned in the category, the more success you're going to have. It's that simple. So if you're priced outside of the category, yes, you're going to be niche. If you're priced within the category, whether you're a UK brand, an Australian brand, or a New Zealand brand, it doesn't matter. You'll be mainstream if you can hit those price points.
Okay, a 70% price adjustment on the strategy is quite a big change.
It's huge, yeah.
How important is consistent shelf pricing across a full region, given the different margin expectations and duties?
It's not. I would argue it's not. I think you've got to look at each country on a case-by-case basis. While ASEAN is a group, every country is so different. You only have to look at Singapore and Malaysia. You can drive from Singapore to Malaysia in 4 hours, but the markets are absolutely completely different, just because of the consumer, because of spending dynamics, because of economies, because of taste preferences, all these things. So you've really got to look at each market very individually and attack it. We've worked with Starbucks, we've worked with KFC, all these different groups, and even for something like that, it's so very different when it comes to product range, price points, those types of things. So you've really got to look at it on every country on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, they are incredibly different. Like you say, even the closest of Malaysia and Singapore, very different as well. And Andy, Emma reflected on a survey they've done as well across the region. What's your feeling at the moment as well for companies that you're dealing with as well? Obviously, we've stopped using the B word and now we're using the C word. Are companies sort of hunkering down and just waiting to see this out? Are they looking out for other markets to spread the risk? What's your feeling from the ITAs?
That's a tough one. It varies, but I think in terms of the European markets, companies are either pausing any new initiatives or possibly considering setting up in an EU27 market so that they've got a presence within the EU and can carry on sort of as before, more or less. In terms of interest in further flung markets, yeah, I think we are seeing that. I mean, numbers for our UAE food and drink webinar, for example, have topped 130 or something at the moment. So that's always been a popular market. People smell money when you talk about the Gulf, but that's unusual in my experience for a webinar on a relatively small market like that. And we've seen a lot of interest in the South Korea webinar, for example. It's I don't know. It's a funny mixture. I think some of our exporters are quite conservative with the small c sort of anyway, and EU exit has maybe scared them slightly more, to be honest, in terms of European markets. So if they're not already operating in the rest of the world, they may be looking more actively. But you tend to find people think of the States as as an obvious easy market, but it's not. It's 50 distinct markets that have their own regs and are not straightforward. But ASEAN is probably not, unless people have got friends or relatives there or have been there on holiday or something and made it real. It's not necessarily a region that they would automatically think of, I think. So it's important to do more webinars like this to raise awareness.
Yeah, we definitely saw an uptake in interest in ASEAN as well, Brexit, but it's that conversion. I think that the knowledge that a company like Insight can provide is key to getting there, because it is a long way away and they are distinct markets as well. So that's the beauty of doing some of these webinars as well. But, thanks for that. Insight, apart from retail, can you also help with B2B raw materials?
Yes, yeah, we totally can. I mean, this event was obviously more focused on grocery, but we've also got food service and B2B as well. So food service obviously doing it very tough at the moment everywhere. I don't think that's any different in the UK, to be honest. It's been very difficult. Yeah, we're seeing good gains still in the B2B. When I think of B2B, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's more focused on raw materials and manufacturing and the like. So we work with a company, for example, a big rice producer that as part of their process, they mill off, products like rice bran and the like that are good for nutritional, provide nutritional and functional, I guess, applications in the food manufacturing sector. So yes, we're in that sector as well. The same principles apply really about engagement, about really trying to understand the market and going after distributors that are or traders or whoever you're going after that they're interested in more than just one trade. That they're more interested in getting that package right and then taking it out to market rather than just taking something, putting a big margin on it and seeing what happens, because the start's the hard part, and you've really got to see that through with a partner over the long term.
Great. Right, well, a couple of minutes left just to get these last few questions in. Anything we don't get to, we'll fire over to you guys to answer directly as well. But question on fish now, is fish an option for the market, and how can you support entry with fish?
Fish, it depends on what it is. I mean, if it's we've been in the if it's kind of bulk frozen into cat food fish, we can't really help with that. But if it's well packaged product for grocery, or it's well priced and and good quality product for food service, then yes, we can definitely help there.
A juicy one here as well about investment in the region rather than exporting to. So are there benefits to UK brands setting up local production in ASEAN to achieve more competitive price proposition rather than exporting from the UK, from Jonathan?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, I think, and there are pros and cons. Part of the reason that there is a strong value proposition in being from the UK or being from New Zealand or being from Australia in terms of quality, food safety, origin recognition, all these things. But if you are a brand that is more interested in that volume play and you're really you're more interested in throughput in terms of sales, then yes, definitely. And we have seen that, and we've got a number of current clients that are looking very closely at that. Again, it just comes back to getting it right? Because if you get that one wrong, that's going to be a difficult one to undo.
Fantastic. Emma, are there any final comments from yourself before we? I'm conscious that poor old Cameron's done a lot of the answering the questions. Any final comments from you before we finish off?
Yeah, no, sorry, Cam. He was on a roll, so I thought I'd let him carry on. No, I don't think so, unless anybody's got a particular question for me. I mean, we can certainly answer any questions that we didn't get round to, and people are more than welcome to directly get in touch with their the DOT or directly with Cameron and I to explore maybe. What usually happens post these events is that I'll have one-on-one Zoom calls with anybody that's slightly interested following this webinar, to talk to them a little bit more about their particular brand and how we could support that. So the quicker you get in there, the better, because they only have a certain window with time zones in this part of the world, and it usually gets pretty chocker after events. So I'm open to be doing that. So yeah, that's about it.
Fantastic. So you're saying you have a short shelf life, Emma. That's what you're saying.
Yes, I have a very short shelf life when it comes to back-to-back calls in the UK.
Fantastic. Right, listen, we're going to close it off here. Look, I mean, ASEAN is where the growth and opportunity is. It's a tremendous set of markets as well. It's closer and more familiar than you think. But as we've shown today with DIT, with Emma and Cameron, there's so much support out there from ourselves, from DIT, from all the other companies as well. So do please use and abuse us. So thank you to all our speakers, Emma, Cameron, Andy. Thank you to Jane, who I know is lurking in the background there as well, who's helped set this up as well. So thank you very much for that as well, and to my team as well. Thank you very much. And again, we will connect everyone after this, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you all very much, and thank everyone for attending.
Thanks, Ross. Thanks, Andy. Thanks, Veronica.
Thanks very much. Cheers, guys.
Thanks, bye-bye.